I'm here. I'm trying to move from my phone to my
I've gotten a couple of messages that say the Zoom link isn't working, but it worked for me.
You're on a different link.
Okay, what link?
You're using a participant link. So if we're, shall I sign out and test it? Since I'm not essential to the start.
Looks like we have about 30 attendees so far.
Okay, so they're getting in. Okay.
Well, I can't get in.
Okay, my wife says she can't get in. I do see 41 participants, but okay, I'm looking at this as panelists. I've got attendees over here. Yep.
Yep, it looks like we're getting people are still coming in, so it's working.
But if I share that link, which I have done, I'll fess up.
Oh.
Give it a couple minutes for folks to tune in. So far, 32 attendees, 11 panelists.
Someone added a different Zoom link to Facebook.
That was me. I'm guilty.
Okay.
And that's what
I was
hear me?
I
was muted. I think somebody might come in as a panelist there.
Did you, is that the panelist link or the public
it's whatever
link?
was on my calendar.
Yeah, that'll be a problem. I've done that before myself, and
all right,
it won't work.
I'll delete it.
I'm in there, Keith. Just I'll go double check.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Okay, good. I'm having issues.
That link. From the county website? Okay. Hmm?
Is my video
on? Doesn't look like it. Yeah, I could turn my video on.
Bruce, I saw your hand was up, so I'm just allowing you to talk.
I'm not on the panel. Apparently, I'm in the public. I'm not sure what to do about that.
I just promoted you. I think you should be able to join as a panelist now.
Okay, looks like I'm a panelist now. Thank you.
All right.
You're welcome.
We have a question from Tony Michelle Ricci. Am I on the panel or a participant?
is the question.
I'll type for an answer.
Thank you.
All right, good. It looks like folks are trickling in. Give it another, just another minute or two. Get started here. Okay, it looks like our attendee and panelist numbers have somewhat stabilized, so why don't we get going? And if people continue to jump in, they can catch up through the introductions. All right, well, welcome everybody to the public meeting for the Together Chaffee County Comprehensive Plan. We're broadcasting live from various parts of colorful Colorado. I'm Dave Dixon. I'm the lead planner from Cushing Terrell, architecture and engineering firm based out of Denver. With me, I have Nora Bland and Wayne Freeman, principal in charge of the project, and Nora is the lead public engagement planner. And we also have a VIP list of panelists here who have dedicated the last several months of their volunteer hours to this project. So thank you very much for everybody joining in. The project began in early 2019 to update the county's comprehensive plan. So this is an informational presentation open to the public, similar to how we do a public open house, where we'll really talk about the Together Chaffee County comp plan, what it means, what it says, and what the future steps are for getting your input in, getting your questions in throughout the closing, kind of the final phase 3 of the input process as we get to a version 2 of the plan. Many of you have seen version 1, and this is part of the process of getting to that version 2. So I'll go ahead and share my screen so that we can have the presentation slides we prepared ready. So hopefully everybody can see the opening slide, the beautiful vista of the Upper Ark Valley with public meeting dated September 17th, 2020. All right, I will go ahead and do a quick outline of the session, and then I'll turn it over to Planning Commission Chair Anderson Horn and the Board of County Commissioners to do brief welcome statements. We're going to go through an introduction. We'll do welcome. We'll have the county census representative, April, do a brief presentation on kind of what's going on out there. We'll answer some FAQs, some commonly, frequently asked questions to get those kind of off the table, or to at least clarify some of the things that we've heard throughout the past couple of weeks about parts 1 and 2 of the draft plan, of this version 1 of the draft plan. Go through an executive summary of what this plan is really trying to do, and outline the public engagement we've gone through, which has been extensive and really interesting and a lot of fun. So we'll have Nora talk about that, talk about how that led into the county vision, the themes, and some of the early parts of how we made this plan kind of happen. And really the meat of this presentation is the growth management piece, the future land use plan. We've had a lot of questions about this, a lot of confusion. So we're going to clarify all this, what a preferred growth scenario means, and what the sub-area plans mean and what they say and how they might change how we think about land use planning in the county. And then we'll have instructions or information on how to follow up with engagement, and have a brief Q&A afterwards, or about 30 minutes, hopefully, a Q&A, to where if you submit your questions via the Q&A app at the bottom of your screen, we'll be sure to moderate that and bring up some of those questions at the end. But don't worry and do not panic if you don't get your question answered. There's plenty of ways to get your questions covered. We will provide answers to you in other ways. So I wanted to offer the floor to Anderson Horn, the chair of the Planning Commission of Chaffee County, to offer a welcome statement. Anderson.
Thank you, Dave. You don't need to take away your shared screen. I think a lot of people have seen enough of my face. First, I just want to say thank you to my fellow commissioners for their hard work and for all of the different constituencies that have engaged with us over the last few months, persevering through the obvious drawbacks of social distancing and that sort of thing necessitated by COVID-19. We have to keep moving forward, and it's so great to see so many people who care so much about this county that they're willing to give of their time and energy in whatever way they can. Also, of course, thank you to the Board of Commissioners for their
Piers Anderson might have froze up. We'll give it a second to see if you can shake that internet cobweb loose. Well, until Anderson comes back, I know he wanted to open the welcome statements to the Board of County Commissioners. So if anybody from the Board of County Commissioners would like to make a welcome statement, please do so now.
Well, sure, I'll go ahead. This is Keith Baker, and I welcome everybody for being in the online meeting tonight. This is an outline informational sort of briefing to familiarize you with where the comprehensive plan draft is at this point, and then to begin the public feedback part of this second draft of the comprehensive plan. A lot of work has gone into it. We did have several months pre-COVID-19 when lots of public meetings and public information sessions were held, and we solicited lots of information, and then what the public said was taken and worked into the first draft, and then the Planning Commission has taken that draft and taken additional public input and worked on it, and now it's ready to present to you. One reason that this process has taken quite a long time, obviously, is COVID-19, and the Planning Commission has been laboring under the various constraints imposed on us by that, undesired as they may have been. Another thing that we need to be mindful of is this is our first comprehensive plan update in Chaffee County in 20 years. We've been through similar processes, but as a community, we really haven't had the capacity and practice at having these conversations on a continuous, ongoing basis. So they become heavy lifts. The longer you wait and the less attention you pay to it on a daily basis and as part of your overall community collaborative plan, then the heavier lift it is when it is time to update one. So we're hopeful that coming out of this process, we won't allow that to happen again. It will be an ongoing, more constant conversation, more frequent, smaller updates to the comprehensive plan and all the other subordinate plans that support it over time. The Planning Commission has put in a heck of a lot of work on this, and so have a lot of other people. And we need to make sure that we honor and respect the work that they've done, and also honor and respect all the work that the various volunteers and the people who were engaged in the process from the outset have provided as well. So maybe Anderson is back with us now. And I'd be remiss,
I am, and I apologize for that.
I forgot to mention our staff, our planning department staff, and all of our other members of our staff that have done a great job too. Put in a lot of extra hours, a lot of hours at night when I know they're tired and they would much rather be doing something else. So our hats off to them as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Baker. I apologize for getting kicked off. I'm not sure what happened, but I think thanks all around, especially to those community members, many of whom have reached out. Seeing the numbers that we've had on our various work session Zoom meetings has been really impressive, and we're grateful for your engagement. Dave, before I get kicked off again, I'll just turn it back over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Anderson. Yeah, we'll kind of bear with us with any technical difficulties. We also encourage you to go to any outlet for the plan to follow along with the future land use, particularly if you happen to have a PDF. It might be helpful to have that open. We'll basically go through a lot of information. These slides will be available to everybody, but for the most part, we'll hit the high points and go through the storyline of how these things came about. A couple other notes on ground rules. You know, we've got, looks like 65 total people here, which is fantastic. We expected many people to show up. Probably more will trickle in. If you have questions, please use the Q&A to submit those questions, and we'll have time at the end to have Nora moderate those, and we'll go through the ones that are asked most frequently to make sure that those commonly asked questions are answered. So jot those notes down. If you have a longer question, there's plenty of other outlets for that. You can email the planning staff, and we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end. All right, so now we wanted to offer the county census coordinator, April, a brief moment to also introduce what she has been learning about the census in the county. So April, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My full name is April Opholtz-Bergler. My husband's name is Brian Bergler. We live in Salida, about 3 miles from downtown. We don't reside anywhere else. We own our house. My phone number is 303-359-4729. My birth date is April 15th. Brian's is October 8th. We are not Hispanic or Latino. We are both white and of German descent. I'm a female, Brian is a male. We don't have any children or any housemates other than our cat. His name is Mr. Mister. So I just verbally completed the 2020 census. And believe it or not, I'm not concerned that you have that information about me. And I wasn't concerned about providing this info to the Census Bureau. You know, different branches of the government are privy to way more sensitive info about me. For example, the IRS has my bank account number, my social, and my annual salary, for starters. So if the Census Bureau wants to know how old I am and where I live, it's really not that big a deal to me. And I'm okay with the Bureau having this info, as it will help the federal government divvy out dollars to our state and to our community. It's not just about the money, it's about what that money can do for things we care about, programs we use, and services that keep us afloat, safe and healthy. Census data is used to help fund public safety, emergency preparedness, healthcare, education, libraries, small businesses, housing programs, family services, water management, outdoor recreation, road repair, and the list goes on, folks. When I formally completed my online this past spring, I handed the state of Colorado. Colorado gets, can you guys hear me okay? I have some connectivity issues flashing. It's okay, all right. If Colorado gets an accurate count, there's a good chance we will get more representation in Congress. Colorado and our county have experienced much growth, hence why you are participating in tonight's meeting. So we as a county have to work together to formally capture that growth. Each of us needs to complete our census. It only takes about 5 to 7 minutes to help our county. And if you self-respond, you won't have to connect with the Census Bureau field worker, and you will help save our taxpayer dollars. So In a year that continues to bring us frustration, uncertainty, and heartache, this is something we each can do to help. So I'm going to do a screen share right now, if that's okay. All you need to do is hop online. You go to 2020census.gov. And you click this green respond button. Click this blue start questionnaire button. And typically you would enter your unique census ID right here. However, if you've lost your invitation, you don't have that information, you can click this link below the login button. And hopefully your internet connectivity is faster than mine when you're doing this. And bam, you're ready to go. I want to remind you that the deadline to respond is September 30th. That's less than 2 weeks away. So better sooner rather than later. And if you have any questions between now and the end of the month, you can call me at the 303 number here, 359-4729, or you can shoot me an email at census@chaffeycounty.org. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you, April. Fantastic. I'll go back to screen sharing. And go intro right into the meat of things here. So quick outcomes. We want to collect final input and want to make sure it's not final input towards the final plan. It's final input on version 1 to get to version 2. We have quite a bit more left to do as far as engagement and refining. We're going to have this informational discussion, and we're going to have guidance on how to submit additional questions or comments. All right, so quickly, a couple frequently asked questions that I wanted to clarify right off the bat. Are we changing the zoning of any land? The answer is no. The zoning is not being changed. The zoning or subdivision rules are going to be revisited with a land use code change in the future. That's forthcoming. The county's doing it right by doing a comprehensive plan to understand and do the public process behind understanding what's out there and understanding how people feel, so we can do that in the future. Nothing is changing as far as zoning. That's a very important distinction between that and the next question here. What is a future land use plan? Does it change what I can do in my property? Again, the answer is no. The future land use plan is simply an illustration of the type and character of buildings and activities that may occur in an area. It's a vision. It's not regulatory. It's not zoning. It's not anything other than that. A lot of questions on the suburban residential land use district. Again, that's really just illustration of a type of residential land use that has been up to this point. There's been a missing piece of the residential land use vision in Chaffey County, and we're trying to fill that gap and trying to help the transition between town and county, and town and rural, really. What's the difference between density and covenants versus current zoning? Well, this might be confusing as somebody who bought a lot in a subdivision, but the covenants are really the legal agreement as a buyer of a subdivision lot between you and other buyers, and it's executed through the approval of a subdivision, and it's a legal document that's kind of drafted by attorneys. It might control things like where your building is placed on a lot, but it's different than zoning. Zoning is the authority granted by state statute for the county to establish design standards or density standards on a piece of property. So it's two different things. The future land use plan and the comprehensive plan is neither of those things. It's kind of important to know that. We are basically just establishing a vision for those. Those change through legal means, and this is not necessarily what we're talking about tonight. Why didn't I hear about the public process? Well, we designed a very robust outreach process. But it's important to know we didn't do it all. We can't do it all. It's very, very much impossible. But we think that we've established. We went geographically diverse and adjusted mid project to make sure that we tapped into as many places and people as we could pre-COVID. And now that we're post-COVID and in COVID, we're making sure that we have an online presence so everybody can engage, and that engagement process is not over. And hopefully, for those of you who don't know, myself or the project team, this is exactly what we're looking for as new folks to be involved in the process, and we're not done yet. Okay, executive summary. Really, what this means is, what are the changes to the overall county land use framework? The last comprehensive plan was done in 2020 years ago. What we're trying to really establish here is better guidance for your leaders, for your planning commission, for everybody, for neighbors, for yourself as property owners, for developers, better guidance on land use decisions through a couple of different ways. We've heard over and over again through the public process, we want to keep town, town, and county, county. And we're implementing that essentially through this future land use plan. Really, you've dealt with controversial land use applications as a planning commission and as board of county commissioners. There might be a good project, might be a perfect project, but is it really in the right place? And I think I'd invite Marja, if you're still on the line, to maybe expand on some of that. Can you hear me?
Just unmuted myself, and I just wanted to add, for when we're talking about where we're trying to get to, I think sometimes we communicate in a way that this is about a future land use plan, and we want these certain land uses, and our community has had a lot of recent. Since I've been on the Planning Commission, at least, a lot of good development ideas that have come in, and we have had a lot of conflict over the development proposals, not always because of the content of the development itself, but because that development is not in the right place. Like, it's adjacent to a subdivision that expected no commercial development or no higher density development next to it. And so part of what we're trying to do through this comprehensive plan is create assurances for property owners who've made investments, whether those be homeowners or for property owners that are hoping to do development, so that you can actually look at a comprehensive plan and look at the development code and say, I'm buying this place and I know what it's going to be in the next 20 years, or I know that I'm buying this place and that I can potentially do the type of development that I want to do. And so as we're going through this planning process, like, it isn't only about protecting what's here, but also creating opportunities for the things that people want to create, that bring jobs, that strengthen our economy, that create new housing. And so I, as a county commission or planning commissioner, think a lot about the conflict that we have over the fact that we don't have the appropriate frameworks. And so that creating, the reason we're doing this, not just because the government says we have to, but really because we're trying to figure out how to grow in a way that keeps what we love about being here, creates assurances for the people who've made investments, and creates places where people can go in the future. That's all I had to say.
Thank you, Marja. Well said. So some of the other ways that the adoption of this plan might change the framework of how we deal with land use. This plan is a venue for prioritizing county investments and projects where there previously wasn't really a way to, or a single place where all those ideas were collected. So this is now, and you can read the plan, find out the details of this, but things like where can the county be fiscally responsible and use its taxpayer money most wisely. It's all kind of collected in this plan to be vetted and further down the line used to prioritize projects, whether they're transportation or facilities or whatever it is, a trail, something along those lines. We wanted to use this opportunity to gather all those ideas and prioritize them. And really the ultimate, one of the ultimate goals here is to revise the land use code to bring it into the 21st century and have a land use code that's functional for the county as it is today, rather than as it was in the 90s. And this is one of the key points of doing this project. And the order of operations is to do your comprehensive plan, find out where all those places were that have problems or conflicts, and then outline them, and then go and move into your land use code revisions, which is zoning and subdivision. All right, I'll give the floor over to Nora, who's our public engagement lead planner, to talk a little bit about the 3 phases that we've gone through to get to where we are today and where we're going. Nora, floor is yours.
Thanks, Dave. So what we're calling phase 1 of engagement really focused on a diversity of input methods, including large open houses, smaller neighborhood meetings, and one-on-one interviews with specific stakeholders. This is the type of engagement that you see in a typical comp plan process. And the opportunity to engage online with the Together Chaffee website was available throughout the whole process. So all of the input from phase 1 of engagement contributed to the draft that was released back in March. That draft was then turned over to 6 groups, 6 focus groups based on the major planning themes. And these focus groups are community groups and committees that vetted the first version of the plan to ensure that the visions, goals, strategies were valid and useful for their purposes. And then this leads us to phase 2 of engagement, which is what we're in now. And we're not done yet, but we've had a remarkable series of work sessions that have brought in experts, leaders, and the general public. Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners met 11 times between March and June to go through every portion of the plan with a fine-tooth comb, which is really unique for public servants to participate so much in creating the comp plan. We then held a work session with community groups and subject matter experts to determine who would be responsible for implementing the action steps that are laid out in the plan. And then that brings us to tonight, the virtual public meeting. And your planning commissioners and county staff will be holding in-person input sessions over the next few weeks, after which we will incorporate everyone's comments into a 3rd draft to be reviewed by county staff, planning commission, and the Board of County Commissioners for final approvals. So Dave, you want to go to the next slide? So getting the word out, we did our best to get the word out, not only about meetings, but the whole comp plan process through a variety of channels. We released newspaper articles and ads, opinion pieces. We did radio interviews, over 50 Facebook posts and advertisements, and hundreds of email blasts. So these photos are from some of the bigger meetings that we held in early 2019 in Salida, Buena Vista, and Mount Princeton. And these events were really well attended, and we had great discussions with community members from all across the county. I'm gonna go to the next one. These photos are from some of our smaller neighborhood meetings, like the one held in Nathrop at Chateau Chaparral, and also our workshops with the high schools in both Buena Vista and Salida, where we heard from students. And then the next one, Dan. And then just in case folks still hadn't heard about the comp plan process, we held drop-in events in Salida and Buena Vista, where we set up in storefronts on the main streets with a sandwich board sign directing folks passing by to drop in and give their input. So again, we'd really like to say thank you to everyone who has contributed time and input throughout this process so far. And just please know that the window for input has not closed, and we will go over the ways to submit your input at the end of the presentation here. So Dave, I'll let you talk about how we incorporated all that input.
Awesome, thanks, Nora. Yeah, so that phase 2 was really important and really kind of unique to Chaffee County, since you have these expert and local community groups. What happened is we turned all that into what was originally 6, but now is 7 themes, these 7 boxes that have colors on them. Each one was directed, all the information that we had in version 1 of the draft was given to these special interest groups, these experts. This box in the middle is kind of just a quick outline of who some of those folks were, but we are forever indebted to those people who spent their volunteer time to come in and make sure that each one of these vision statements, which, you know, really the vision is, no matter what kind of project you're working on, these are like guiding statements to help you make decisions, whether it's a land use application or a new county facility or a road improvement project, whatever it is, these are the beginning points of that. So we have really top-notch involvement from these specific groups, and they were heavily vetted by not just Planning Commission, not just Board of County Commissioners, not just the general public, not just the consultants, but all these other groups. There's so many that we couldn't mention them all, but we'll be sure to acknowledge all of them in the final draft. But that phase 2 is super critical for that, and that's the building blocks of the plan. Really, what the rest of what we're going to talk about as far as growth management. It all stems from this, so you're very fortunate in this county to have that kind of involvement. Okay, so the big piece of discussion here, growth management, and that means a number of things. It means looking at history. It means going forward. How are we going to make sure that this next generation of community planning and land use planning really makes sense for what Chaffee County is in this crazy year of 2020. So I wanted to go through the future land use plan first, the map, the plan, everything, what it is, what it isn't. So what is it? It's simply a tool to illustrate the county's, the public's vision for growth. That's really all there is to it. It establishes, it might be colors on a map, and now that we've made a map, it might seem much more real. But what that is simply just an illustration. It's a vision. It provides guidance for your decision makers and for the folks that recommend decisions to the decision makers. Really, it kind of comes back to this overall point. At this point in Chaffee County, what you've done in the past has worked. But going forward with the complexities that we're seeing, we have to kind of ask that tough question of, if you choose to envision growth somewhere or somewhere not, in places, where it might make sense because of a number of reasons, infrastructure, available land, whatever it is, willing owner, if you turn away from some of those, it's going to occur somewhere else. It's kind of that ecological look of planning, land use planning. If you prevent it from happening somewhere, it's going to happen somewhere else. And that somewhere else in the past has been probably rural areas or areas that are kind of the path of least resistance. Well, the issue with that is it will literally cost you as a county and as taxpayers more money in the long run to service those areas, to provide fire and EMS, to provide water and wastewater, those kinds of things. This is kind of the point we're at here. So that's why we do future land use planning, is to make sure that we have a logical way of growing instead of how we used to do it. It's also a way to create opportunities. If we have these goals of diversify our economy and create jobs, you have to have a land use plan that also allows for those opportunities to exist. It's also informed by the public, by the history of planning, the history of subdivision, where the subdivisions are in the landscape, where the conservation easements are. It's all happened through different reasons throughout history. Very important to look at what's existing in order to go forward. And it's informed by landowners, and we made very strong efforts, this panel, this project team, to get out in front of everybody as much as we could, to make sure that any future plans are informed as well as they can by the people who own and control the land. And it certainly is amendable and it's flexible. The future land use plan needs to be a living, breathing thing. It's not, again, that's why it's not zoning. This next piece of what is it not? It's not regulatory. It's definitely not zoning. It's not the county's development plan for anything. It's just simply, these places are probably going to change. Let's have the most informed roadmap to future growth as we can have. And some of these pictures you see on the side, you see all these boards, those were our survey instruments. We also had them online. We asked as many folks as we could to draw on our maps to provide input to us to make sure that we had, again, the most informed land use plan and vision for the future.
Can I add something just real
Absolutely.
quick to that guidance piece that I think is important? As a planning commissioner, I just want to make a clarifying point around a comprehensive plan is adopted by the Planning Commission. It can also be adopted by resolution by the county commissioners, and it becomes a policy guiding document. And what that means is that in the interim, when we're trying to update our zoning code, which is not a short process, a comp plan, 12 to 18 months on average. A land use code can be like 2 to 3 years. It is a much longer, harder, more detailed initiative depending on how deep the update process goes. Ours will likely need a relatively large overhaul. And so while this is not zoning, because it is not to a parcel boundary, it's not You know, it's like there's a yellow block on a map and it says generally in this area, this is what we're thinking. This document will provide guidance for us and inform, you know, help inform how to direct growth in between now and then. Like if a developer comes in and says, I want to do XYZ, they can use this, even though the code doesn't say where it goes. They can use this to say, I want to look for property over there. Or, you know, I have an idea for a development. You kind of, your plan says it wants to go over here, and we can use it in that way. So while it's not exact, it does provide us something that we do not have right now, which is this what we intend for the future? So just wanted to make a clarifying point.
That's perfect, thank you. And kind of
and Dave, I'm sorry if I could jump in.
Absolutely.
Just jump in briefly and piggyback on what Marjo said. It's, you know, recognizing that very likely some growth is going to happen. And we're, you know, like she said, and like you said, we're not changing anything today, but we should have a plan for how we anticipate, based on what we value in this community, have a plan for what we'll do when we're confronted with those choices. And that's what this provides a framework for, without actually changing anything right now. So sorry for interrupting. I just thought that was an important clarification.
Absolutely. No, well said, Anderson. Thank you. Which also begs the question: what is this future land use plan and map ask? What do we ask? And as mentioned, it's what's going to change out there, based on the best available information. And let's create an informed roadmap for those places. You know, there's a lot of the county may not change, and that's an important thing to point out as well. We're not just because it says future doesn't mean it means everything's changing to this certain thing. We're just trying to provide a framework. So ultimately, we can implement these changes, as Anderson mentioned, eventually through the land use code and revisions that's separate from this project and that are forthcoming. A note on how we made these maps. It's an art and a science, future land use planning is. And to the extent that we can use science and hard data, we did. So you're seeing a map here of sensitive lands, and that means, you know, ecological habitats, wildland urban interface, public lands, some of these things that are a little bit more difficult to, or less changing or less changeable. You'll see public lands here in blue, and also conservation easements. We looked at biodiversity areas, which was provided by some of the great studies that are going on concurrently in Chaffee County that came out of the 1% sales tax. You know, the Common Ground Project and Envision Chaffee set us up to do some great information gathering and mapping exercises, and we're incorporating that into the plan. So we looked at sensitive lands, and you can see in some cases in the past, you know, there's some overlap between past subdivisions and what these things are. This is just a way for us to be more informed about how to go forward. Infrastructure was also an important piece of that more scientific part. Through an infrastructure study that was done separately, but as part of the contract and part of the scope of this project, we're especially lucky to be able to be informed by the infrastructure and what's there. Here you'll see some of the parameters that we used to find out what was going on out there. Proximity to water and sanitation lines, for example. We also know pedestrian-oriented development was important. So looking at where trails were, where regional trails were, where connectivity points were. Also public gathering spaces, such as grocery stores, elementary schools, parks, recreation facilities, places where people go every day. You know, what's within a 20-minute walk of those particular places. So this helps us really validate and provide those parameters for what are we looking at out here. So these red squares, you know, are one of the places where all these things, once you layer everything on top of each other, again, kind of looking ecologically. These are some of the places that make most sense from a scientific kind of point of view. And then we take these places and we vet them with as many people, whoever would listen to us, we'd take it to them and say, what does this make sense at all? Or if not, and then that's how we kind of establish, you know, what may happen here. And you know, speaking with people from the development community if we could as well. So that's kind of a little bit of how we came up with this. It wasn't divining rods. It wasn't totally uninformed. We really tried to make it as good as we could from a data standpoint. One other piece that we really feel is important, and I'll touch on this, and I'll invite any of the panelists to jump in here, is really the history of growth management, history zoning. Really, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what's out there, what's on the ground right now. But really, you can read the plan to get details. You can ask any of the staff or read the zoning code or the land use code as it exists. Really, the take-home message is very simple. Up until about 1990, things shifted back and forth. And by things, I mean the land use controls, land use patterns, depending on the economic cycles. For example, prior to 1990, you can see some of these numbers changed, but depending on what was happening out there. And in 1990, the county dipped into something of a recession, with whether it was a changing economy or mines that were shutting down or being, something shifting. It was a recession period. So the response was that downturn led to changes in land use that allowed subdivision of land to be more or less the economic driver of the county's economy. If you look around, what do we have to boost the economy? There's plenty of land, even though a lot of it was in agriculture. And I think the prevailing thinking was that at that time, if we change it, we can use this to our land use code to attract retirees to single family subdivisions whenever things are in a recession period. So you'll see some of your biggest subdivisions kind of occurred on these down cycles. Mesa Antero in the mid 70s, and Game Trail in the late 80s and early 90s in response. Really, here's the thing to think about. And this land use plan attempts to set you up for success from 2020 going forward, if you keep this in mind. Subdivision is still and always will be an integral part of an economic growth pattern in Colorado, in Chaffee County, in the American West and beyond. But the needs have changed in the county. The needs from the municipality standpoint have changed. The economies have changed. They've diversified. So here we are today with essentially a growth pattern from the 90s. And so much has changed since then. More importantly, we have an opportunity right now to set up Chaffee County for success with a new style, a new pattern that considers all these new things, that considers the changing character of the county. Rather than having antiquated patterns, we have or an unclear path going forward. This is really what we're trying to do here, and that's why that's just kind of a little bit of background on why things changed, why they changed. But going forward, there's a real opportunity here to think proactively about what these numbers mean, and that's kind of the take-home message. I'll take just a pause here if the panel has any other things to add about that. It's kind of a big take-home message. Cool, getting thumbs up. All right, so in summary, why are we doing future land use planning? Well, you have a diversified economy. There's different ways to grow your economy rather than relying strictly on the subdivision of land, and there's opportunities out there. Pressure is increasing. I think we're seeing, we all know folks who are in the real estate community maybe, and we're seeing that there's pressure on growth. There's pressure on affordable housing, and we don't want to miss an opportunity to relieve that pressure before it's insurmountable. Before you can't afford to build affordable housing like in other places in Colorado, Summit County or Pickens County. When land costs and construction costs go so high, you miss your opportunity. I think there's still opportunity for that out there. Drought and fire, obviously that's not going anywhere, and that's as a result of certain land use patterns that have happened in the past. That's only going to get worse, as we all know, as we look outside our windows and see smoke right now. And of course, recreation and tourism impacts from those uses are increasing and are increasingly causing compatibility issues, which we'll talk about how that factors into land use here in a minute. That's kind of why we're doing it. It's that simple. It's illustrating a vision for growth here. That's all it is.
Dave, just a quick, and I'd actually like to call on Becky on this one, because on that relief valve for affordable housing, we frequently had the question on whether the county should be the place where affordable housing is created. And I think it's important to sort of talk about there are different income levels that we're trying to create affordability for. And within sort of the working families, working individuals who are not moving in to get their retirement home. That's a different housing sector. And so in looking at land and looking at housing within the municipalities, there are certainly places that all of the municipalities are currently working to create things like apartments and create things like, townhomes that are appropriate for very, very low income, because you want people to be able to work close to their job and not have to travel really far. But there's also, you know, teachers and policemen and firemen that are now kind of moving into a class of needing affordable housing, which is where those areas of land that are close to town that might be need incentives to or support with the land use zoning to create more affordable living for those professional classes that are not able to afford a $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 home on multiple acres out in the county on well and septic. And so when we were looking at that connection between, or you were looking at that connection between land availability and potential higher densities and infrastructure, some of it is to kind of create those places where we can create neighborhoods that are technically part of town that can begin to use land more efficiently for affordable housing. I'll let Becky follow up on that if I screwed that up.
No, I appreciate it. You really kind of framed that perfectly. I think to put kind of some tangible numbers and figures to it, I just want to relay, I had a great conversation today with one of our major employers who has an employee base that earns a fairly decent wage. And when I say decent, I mean they wouldn't qualify for big A government subsidized affordable housing. So these are people who are earning you know, $60,000 to $120,000 a year, and yet still getting into our housing market is an extreme challenge, particularly without down payment assistance, and with our market being pressured the way that it is from people moving in. Now that we can Zoom for work, we are considered on one of the Zoom towns where telecommuters are now migrating to. So I think it's really important as we look at our land use to remember that we are going to get what we ask for. And so we want to make sure that we're asking for, and when I say that, I mean we are adopting goals, visions, and ultimately, you know, like Marjo said, 2-3 years from now, we'll get through a code. But we want to make sure that we're asking for a range of housing. We refer to it as a housing continuum. So there's housing that needs subsidies and supports, and then there's market rate housing that is going to be built anyhow. And it's very important for us to be able to locate areas that can support that missing middle housing, it's often referred to as. So that's, again, those middle incomes from, you know, say our area median income in Chaffee County is $55,000. That's 100% of our area median income. And the missing middle usually goes from 100 to 200% of our AMI. So that's everything between $55,000 and $100,000 of an annual income for a household is the type of housing, or one type of housing that is missing in our stock right now. So I think this is an excellent opportunity to intentionally make sure that we're managing the growth that's coming at us in a way that our employees are, and our neighbors and our peers are able to stay here and raise their families here.
That is a perfect setup for the discussion on future land use, especially the residential land use districts that we're going to talk about. So thank you two very much for that. Okay, so here's where we were as far as the discussion on growth management. You're going to hear future land use, you're going to hear zoning. Those are two different things as mentioned before, but they are connected in some ways. So here's a list of the districts or the designations of future uses that seem to be needed in going forward with this land use plan in 2020. So I split it up in here in the top 7 that you see are the ones that have changes that might that might change the way we think about land use and make decisions on it. The ones in the bottom there are the ones where there's not really significant changes proposed. They're sort of mirroring the existing land use. Not that they can never change. It's important to note this is it's not saying never change. It's just no change in use at this point in time, and that change should be discussed on a case-by-case basis. That's all we're really talking about here. So we'll go through these one by one, try to hit on the high points here, make sure we have enough time at the end to talk about these. Okay, the first point of discussion here is the rural or agricultural future land use. This is really reflective of what's there. Want to preserve the character of the rural areas, support our agricultural economy, support the rural landscape and the working landscapes. No change in use is proposed as far as where the rural areas are at. The significant change proposed here is really in prioritized landscapes, in areas that we love or we love for certain reasons. We want to accommodate conservation subdivision design and cluster development, or whichever tool might work for those particular areas. And we'll talk about how that might happen from, go from A to B, and why there might be a place that has these design standards or not. But really that's the difference. And we'll talk a little bit more about conservation subdivisions. It's something that's in the land use code now. We're looking at ways to make it more easy, more accessible, and more meaningful to use from a development standpoint, so that it's a win-win for all parties. That's really the significant change there. Rural residential is perhaps a piece of land that is in the rural areas but is not used for agriculture. Is an existing use. They're in platted subdivisions typically. They're large lot, low densities from the 70s to the 90s, as we discussed. Want to keep these in place. We're not designating any change in use. The one significant change proposed, or the two of them, again, promoting conservation subdivision design rather than in certain areas to preserve those areas that we think are important. And it's not the density of the residential area as much also as the type and character of the use. And this is something that we're introducing here between a couple of different residential land uses that you'll have to consider as you go into the land use change within 1 to 3 to 5 years when the land use code changes. As it is now, there are certain uses that can be home-based businesses or location neutral, people moving into these homes and starting a business out of them that may not be necessarily compatible with their neighbors. And the plan doesn't necessarily point out where all those are. It's just introducing the idea that this is a conflict that may be emerging, and that we want to have some kind of framework in place to make sure that these things aren't incompatible. If anybody would like to point out specific examples, there are some out there I think you deal with from a recommendation standpoint.
Yeah, just a clarification. I think the point that I think you're trying to kind of hammer home for us is, when we talk about future land use plans, people tend to focus on density, and use sometimes can be just as important to preserving community character. And so Chaffee County currently has very few distinctions between the types of districts we have. Like, we have rural and rural residential. And because there are within those a huge number of types of activities that are allowable, either by right, by a limited impact review, or by a major impact review, we don't really have much guidance on where these types of things can go. And we've seen a number of very controversial land use applications as a result of that. And so what we're hearing from community members is, if we're in an existing subdivision, we want it to stay as like a residential area. And unless we have discussions going forward from now through the land use code about what is appropriate in and around certain subdivision areas, we're going to continue to have those conflicts. So I think that's kind of what you're getting at it. Like, let's not just talk about density, let's also talk about use. And the proposal with this rural residential is to be more deliberate about what types of uses are in those areas.
Exactly, yes. Yep. And making sure that we have a land use framework that accommodates those where there previously might not have been much guidance on those things. All right, thank you. Going into the next tier of residential type future land uses is suburban residential. There's been a lot of questions on this, but really it comes down to what we've been missing from a land use framework. As Becky mentioned, this missing middle. This is a land use type, an illustration of a type of building or activity or type of residential area that sets you up for an either or. It's a transitional area. In many cases of the county, you go from town to rural very abruptly, and this is allowing an opportunity to smooth that transition. And the idea is when you go into revising the land use code, there's a couple different tiers of residential at this sort of idea of density on the fringe of municipalities, and we're trying to use this as that bridge to get to that point. Right now, it's municipal zoning right into oftentimes rural residential or residential, and there's from what that zoning allows you to do is not necessarily the vision of what we've heard from the folks through the public process. We want to keep those two things, town and county, but the transition between them is necessary. And not only can this provide an outlet to smooth that transition, but it can also provide an opportunity to create that missing middle, that density, that type and character of a housing type that allows you to do things like ADUs or some other way to accommodate a smaller type of house to get that missing middle land use type in there.
Dave, this is Keith. This is the type of thing we're talking about immediately adjacent to the municipalities. And when we have the discussions between the county and the municipalities about future growth plans and what the municipalities would like to see in some of these areas, where to extend services, where to plat the streets, where to do all those sorts of things. This is what we're talking about in those areas. That's what I'm following here.
Yep, that's correct. This is the one where ultimately these areas may be planned to be annexed into the municipalities, but if they do develop outside of that annexation process and that servicing process, we want to make sure that there's compatibility and coordination between the municipalities. Things like road standards and through agreements between the two parties. This is how we can kind of set that up. This is really the lead into exactly that, Keith. You're exactly right. And it's important to think this is a 10-year plan. It's not a tomorrow plan. It's a 10-year plan. And when you think that far down the line, really it kind of comes back to that growth pressure issue. Some places right at the fringe of town might be ideal for growth. And there's really kind of two things, two take homes here. If you have an issue, if somebody out there has an issue with the maps of where this suburban residential designation is, please let your planning commissioners know. Please let people know. Ultimately, this is the time to get that kind of discussion going and get it right. But also remember that the second part is a benefit of having this designation, like I said, to accommodate that missing middle, to accommodate that missing piece and bridge that gap so that ultimately as growth occurs, as we would like it, as we've heard in existing municipalities, from the middle and out, increase or decreasing in density. This is that good piece to have in there, that piece of the puzzle that's been missing.
Thank you.
Can I just add this becomes a question for us as a community. I think there's a couple things. First, I've definitely heard from community members concern about this designation because they felt like maybe someone slapped something really high density over them and they're in what's considered for them a rural area, and it's one dwelling unit per 2 acres. As we're moving forward through this discussion, I think there's a couple things for us to think about and discuss together as a community. And one is, if there are areas that have infrastructure, we need to have really serious discussions about that because infrastructure is expensive. If we decide we don't want to do infill where infrastructure exists, it means we need to create infrastructure somewhere else, which means rates go up for people who are paying for that infrastructure. So the use of our existing infrastructure is a really important discussion. We have areas where there is growth potential, where there are greenfields, where we can create potentially new development without, disrupting what exists. We have other areas where we're going to have some hard discussions about, like, if you're right next to town and infrastructure, and, you know, you've had, you know, 1 dwelling unit per 2 acres, there's going to be growth pressures around you. Like, that's just the reality, even though it hasn't happened yet. But that infrastructure was all put in place at some point in time. And so we need to have those really sensitive discussions. And I mean that in a way of, like, we want to respect your homes, but we're also trying to create a plan for the future. And so these are the trade-offs we're kind of like discussing right now. And it's not meant to make assumptions, but we're doing our best guesses with these blobs of color. The other is that I think when we're talking about suburban residential and, you know, looking at what's between Salida and Salida and Poncha Springs, there's a bunch of development between our communities that are at all sorts of different densities. And maybe some of the things we need to have discussions about is refining the suburban residential designation in the future land use code when we move into the zoning code to create gradations. And so it goes up to 16 dwelling units per acre. Maybe that's only where there's like a designated growth area with the towns. But maybe there's areas where there are subdivisions that are more dense, and there are areas where there are subdivisions that are lower density. And we have gradations of this development that makes sense for protecting what's out there as well as accommodating growth. And so I think this is one of the big ones we're going to have to kind of work through together as a community.
Precisely, yeah. And we've already received some really good commentary on this, and we are looking harder at what this particular designation means from a character and description of what this means, and also where it's at. So we appreciate that commentary that we've received already. So thank you, Marjorie, on that. One other last point is that this is when we're looking at folks moving in and perhaps doing home occupied businesses or location neutral, working out of their home office. The idea is that there is some additional understanding about what that might look like, what that character, what that type of, you know, potentially commercial use in a suburban area might be. And again, if we look at it as concentric circles moving out from a municipality, this is the one that is this mixed residential future land use is one that might be immediately adjacent to a municipality, intended for areas of potential annexation, where we kind of know things might occur. And the take home here really is there's not necessarily targeted growth areas in the county comprehensive plan, but we do want to get to that point. This is sort of a way to bridge that gap as well. There are areas that are encouraged to develop and that are encouraged to annex through the 3-mile plans of the municipalities, and this is trying to bridge that gap as well, to coordinate with municipalities and ultimately try to lay the groundwork for future agreements between municipal and county land use plans. So we're trying to make it, you know, sort of set an initial roadmap about what this might look like from the urban or municipal expansion standpoint. See if there's anything else on that. Yeah, just making sure that we have, this is the type of land use to make sure we have a shared vision of growth, really. A couple of the other ones that are really allowing more flexibility and trying to create opportunities in a land use standpoint for some of the things that we heard that may be a goal or strategy, you know, things like diversify our economy, encourage certain types of manufacturing or whatever it may be. This is an outlet for that. This is an outlet for creating those opportunities, this mixed use corridor. There are certain commercial or other kinds of uses that serve the county well, and they help with economic development and job creation and having that jobs housing balance. And we've established this one to be nodes, not really widespread strip commercial or anything, just trying to focus those nodes of where these things might be and offer flexibility. Mixed use doesn't mean necessarily ground floor commercial, stories of residential above. It's horizontal mixed use as well. Just want to make sure that we have flexibility for those kinds of things, create the opportunities for the things we want to create, and again have that coordinated plan between municipalities that ultimately can get into an IGA. between our three municipalities. The rural mixed use is an interesting one. The idea here is that there's a number of recreation or tourism or resort-based commercial and residential types of uses in the county that are increasingly looking for ways to do more with what they have, whether it's a rafting company adding a certain activity to have more year-round visitation, or campgrounds expanding, whatever it may be. This is trying to accommodate for that. And it's sort of a part of the economic development conversation, but also as it is now, there's certain things you can do almost anywhere in the county that may or may not be compatible with what's next to them. So this is really trying to create the opportunity and accommodate those expansions or that intensity or whatever it may be from a growth standpoint. This is a future land use that's accommodating residential or potentially small commercial that's based on the tourism economy. That's kind of the idea. Pressure's growing. We all know pressure's growing out there, and you're coming up with some difficult decisions. This is trying to accommodate that. Really, that's pretty much why we have this in there. So now we're into the ones that not much change is proposed. The rural commercial, the industrial, some of the things that we'll talk about next is really embracing what's on the ground now, and trying to help places where there might be vacant commercial lots and business parks, for example, Smeltertown or near BV, wherever it may be, to use that and then designate it as future use, so that there's still a chance to really work on those angles and promote job growth, economic development. But not much change really proposed. It's not like we're designating a huge area of rural commercial. It's really just accommodating those uses and promoting their future use. It happens kind of naturally in some ways, so we're trying to accommodate that. Same with light industrial, accommodating existing future light manufacturing areas where larger buildings, those kinds of things that maybe shouldn't be right next to residential subdivisions should go. Also mesh that into our economic development framework with things like promoting geothermal energy. There's been a lot of discussion of tapping into opportunity zones, those kinds of things. Talking more about that in a minute, but that's the objective, is to we want sustainable energy, renewable energy. We've hopefully organized it in the plan in a way where it says this is what we want. Here's the places where we may want it. Mining claim. This is kind of an interesting one that the state of Colorado and other western states have to deal with. As it is, based on our mapping, there's about 600 or 700 of these across the county, most of which are old mining claims from 100 plus years ago that are surrounded wholly by public lands, and so that's kind of an issue. Could be an issue going forward. We know places like La Plata County, other counties in Colorado have had issues as people start to intensify uses on this. This is just simply a way to track what's going on out there to ensure nothing really causes undue harm in these areas, which we know through wildfire and other risks, unsuitable soils, other things. And these are usually places where you can't do a drain field for septic. So just wanted to make, kind of have a backlog or catalog of these places, know where they are, so we can track what's going on out there a little bit better, so that, people don't get themselves into trouble by doing something particularly that they don't know can or can't be done out there, or would cause undue wildfire risks, that kind of thing.
Dave, would this apply to small inholdings in the forest or on BLM?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, really. These you don't see these in the valley bottom. These are the ones that are up out there, those small inholdings. They're kind of scattered. If you look at the map, they're these strips that used to just basically be platted pieces for mining claims that people have turned into vacation homes or cottages in some cases. Okay, and public lands, this is essentially overlaid upon all the public lands, the national, state lands, municipal, county, state, federal. No change in use is proposed. Open space, one distinction to make on this: open space is different than maybe, and these pictures may not do this justice, but it's really dedicated open space. It's if you do a subdivision and you set aside land in perpetuity or in permanence for open space, or for maybe it has trails, maybe it has a park or recreation facility on it. That's the idea here. It's dedicated permanently to open space, and that's what it's going to be. touching quickly on a couple other elements of the land use plan, the future economic activity node. Really what this is intending to do is trying to help you out and be opportunistic about the places that might be focused areas for future, really just future economic development. And after analyzing all the land, all the infrastructure, looking at all the input that we have and all the evidence we have, these are the places that have all the right characteristics, and all the right reasons, and are in the right spot as far as we can tell, the best we can be informed, to harbor economic development, whether that's taking advantage of an opportunity zone, in which in some parts of the county are qualified to do so, or to build a new facility, or whatever it may be, a new building, a new project. This is a targeted way to incentivize those kinds of things using state and federal programs or otherwise. And this is when you identify these on a map, for example, it kind of gets you one step ahead of perhaps your neighbors in really saying, hey, we did our homework, we vetted these places out. For these reasons, we think this is a reason why you should give us some support or resources to build a new whatever facility it may be. That's the idea. Similarly, there are opportunity sites. Sorry, I jumped around a little bit. These are kind of based on a number of criteria based on our infrastructure analysis and otherwise. These might be sites where things that we know we want, such as affordable housing, such as other things, might be appropriate based on a number of criteria, and we have evidence to support that in the plan. It's just a simple way. It's not saying we're going to do anything. It's just simply a way of we have evidence-based discussion on why these sites might be really valuable to do something, whoever may do it in the future. Couple notes on land use overlays. The comprehensive plan points these out as tools in the toolkit to do things like conservation or preservation. There's two of them here that we've outlined, and we haven't really established where these are. That's really for the land use code update, and again, trying to provide parameters and evidence for doing that in the future. The natural resources overlay, the objective of that is to protect things we love about Chaffee County, and really just provide additional standards such as a conservation subdivision design. That's the idea. If there's this overlay, which is geographic across the county, places within that overlay, that's where we want to promote conservation subdivision design for a number of reasons, which essentially, we'll talk about this in a minute, but lets you do certain things to get certain things. That's the idea. The Arkansas River overlay is one that gained a lot of traction during the phase 2 of our public and stakeholder outreach. We know that there's been things that have occurred in the past and will continue to occur on the county, unincorporated county part of the river that may or may not be detrimental, probably detrimental to certain user groups, whether that's wildlife habitat or rafting community or cycling community, whatever it may be. We've heard that there might be things that we want to incorporate to help continue to protect these things. Really, it's to help you better understand what's happening out there. If you have additional standards, this example right here, this is just an example of where it might, where you might establish these standards, which might be additional setbacks or riparian corridor replacement, or if something gets disturbed. There's a bunch of great precedent out there in the state of Colorado and beyond about how you can protect your river by doing a land use overlay. The comprehensive plan simply sets up the parameters for doing so. And this is one that's still in the works. We're still receiving comments about this. So this is an example of how it might work, where it might occur around the city of Salida. And one last note on conservation subdivisions. This is something that's been gaining a lot of traction, and it's a really great idea. It's, as mentioned, it's part of the land use code now, but there may be ways to promote this further and formalize a process of review or of information gathering that makes this become more of a win-win for both developer, for neighbor, for owner, for everybody involved. On the top here is just an illustration from Randall Arendt, who provided some great meetings for the county. Thanks to Becky and her team for putting those together. Just a simple 55 home 2-lot subdivision in a traditional sense. When you reduce lot size and consider natural resources in your design, you really can do a lot of really great good things with these types of things. So that's the idea, is that we look a little bit deeper into how we can use these to promote what we want in the county. Okay, let's see, we're doing all right on time. Want to talk a little bit about scenarios and the preferred scenarios. This was an important part of the process for the team, for the public, for everybody to understand how we're going to get from point A to point whatever it is in the future. And so what we did is we established a couple scenarios. A being business as usual. If we change nothing, what might happen? We used community input and GIS analysis to come up with B and C. In short, they both tried to accomplish different things. B was conservation corridors and connectivity, pushing growth towards existing centers and corridors. Had a couple different parameters that we used to predict or theorize how growth might occur. C was really a kind of an all-in, long-term growth focus to existing communities, and we presented these to the public. A couple take-home pieces here. The scenario A was not really, nobody really said that we want to stick with A. Whether or not they agreed, everybody agreed B and C were the be-all, end-all. A was the point where we want to start from and go towards something else. So what we did is we brought these scenarios, introduced them in the open houses and in public online forums and in the Planning Commission work sessions, and we decided, Planning Commission decided there's some things in B that we really like, some really good common sense things. And there's some things in C that we really like, but we know it's going to take a long time to get to them. So basically took the best of both and vetted them with everybody and came up with this preferred scenario. While there's not necessarily a list of exact things to do to get this preferred scenario, the idea is that this analysis and the input we receive back will really help you as people in 2020, as leaders in 2020, speak to the people in 2025 and beyond. Really, this is what we're thinking. We know we have to get to this point. And we pointed to some of the actual things in the plan, some of the strategies in the plan that will help us get us there. So might not seem like much, might not feel like much, but procedurally it was critical I think for us to get to these action items that we need to go. Okay, and I know we're throwing a lot out there, so just remember to jot down those questions, submit them. Hopefully everybody's learning something, not only about the process, but about how we got to some of these solutions. So we're gonna jump into the sub-area plans, which is really another really critical part about basically all the stuff we just talked about. How does that happen on the ground? What does that look like? So we'll go through these. I'll hit the high points. The great thing about this in Chaffee County is we were able to engage municipalities and neighbors in discussion in a number of different ways to make sure that some of the things in these plans are really, as we apply these policies to the ground, does this make sense? And so I'll hit some of those high points here. But there's 4 of them, as you can see on these blue blobs here. And there's also a couple places that really need a little bit more work. To be honest, there's about 6 of them, and there might be 7 now as we get comments back. We're calling these focus areas because after this plan is adopted and things move forward, these are places that might be a little bit more difficult, might require a little bit more specific neighborhood level thinking because of circumstances that are evident in these particular places. So I'll kind of touch on some of these, how they fit into the plan, but the idea is that neighborhood level planning can occur here. A lot of this is to focus on infrastructure problems and infrastructure, maybe not today, but going forward. How can we make sure that we don't overstep the capacity of the county to serve these places in the future so that public health and safety is maintained in the next 10 years? So we'll jump into Buena Vista first. Some of the key points, and again, there's a lot of words in these slides. Please read through them. Please read the plan. But some of the key points about the story of how this came about. In Buena Vista, there's some obvious things that are going to limit growth. Water rights and infrastructure probably being the number one. There's also some topographical and physical challenges with slope, with perhaps getting infrastructure to certain places. We vetted all those and we try to go through some of those really kind of in detail to understand what might happen here. Existing subdivision and existing land use pattern was a big part of we're trying to grow smart. The town of Buena Vista has got some really great policies, really great 3-mile plan that we tried to incorporate and really just sort of make that more incorporated into the county's land use framework. Rather than sprawling out, let's make gateways, let's make nodes, let's make growth happen from the middle out. Just pretty basic smart growth, land use planning concepts. The other piece that we incorporated here is the roads and connectivity and transportation aspect of the thinking that the town has done. If you look here on the plan, and if you look in the plan itself, we've incorporated these dashed red and green lines. We've incorporated the transportation connectivity framework that the town has thought out, in many cases very well. And this is something the Transportation Advisory Board, which is a committee advisory group for the county, can immediately take into the next phase of this, which is a transportation master plan. So we try to lay a roadmap for that going forward by asking the town what they think and how they think some of these, where some of these problem points are. So the incorporation of that transportation and connectivity ideas is a big part of this. We also have Johnson Village in here, which, as far as growth, we know you have to take a hard look at infrastructure before really doing much in Johnson Village. And that's why it's a focus area. That's why it's one of these areas of future planning. It always has and will have potential for growth. We know people have been trying to do things there, but it does have this sort of hangover from the 90s style of planning. And this plan really just attempts to straighten some of that out and provide more of a sound framework for land use and transportation in this area. There's a couple of just points to make is we don't want to jeopardize existing housing that may be affordable in this area. We want to make sure that that's maintained. Also don't want to recreate a town in Johnson Village. There's with South Main and with the historic downtown of Buena Vista, there's already town centers there. Johnson Village is what it is, and there's a reason for that. So those are the kind of the two linchpins of that conversation. And going forward, we want to make sure we keep that in mind. The plan states that clearly, and it also states we need to look at infrastructure before much happens there. Sub area, the next one's the Mid Valley, the Middle Arkansas Valley as we call it, which is centered by Nathrop, the Highway 285 corridor going north-south, Chalk Creek corridor going up towards Mount Princeton, down to Centerville and Mesa Antero. Some of the take-homes on this, it's a residential neighborhood, but like Johnson Village, there's kind of a likelihood of development occurring there. So one of the things we want to make sure that we make clear is maybe from the neighbors don't necessarily, when we were in Chateau Chaparral doing our neighborhood meeting, there wasn't a whole lot of urgency to do commercial uses there, or really to do much there at all. It's a neighborhood, and we know people go into jobs elsewhere, but maybe there's a couple of things we can do looking 10 years down the road, such as providing playgrounds or park facilities or some kind of open space for the kids that live there. We know Nathrop is a center for affordable housing. Let's keep that ball rolling. Let's keep it going. Some of those things are jeopardized by infrastructure. And that's why Nathrop is a focus area. For things like, if you look at just drawing a boundary around this and doing a town site overlay or some kind of special districting, again, looking 5-10 years down the road, what are we going to need to do in Nathrop to help them out to make sure that infrastructure, as it is now, there might be problems, but we do definitely need to focus on this area a little bit more, look a little closer at what those problems are to come up with really good solutions going forward. We know there's CDOT access issues. Those are the kinds of things that we can all focus on if you do another master plan or additional master planning for Nathrop. As far as the rest of the rural county around it, we really can't envision much change here without dealing with some of the transportation issues, and we know that. We've stated it in the plan. We know that there's some places in Mount Princeton and up Chalk Creek that intensification of use might cause problems. So the plan tries to lay out some steps towards making sure that when those things occur, we're tracking and we're making sure that the right services and capacity are in place to ensure that we don't overstep our bounds there. But otherwise, the rest of the Middle Valley is really tended to be no change in use. As far as Salida is probably the most interesting piece for future land use. As Mardo and others have noted, we're seeing growth pressure on the fringe. A lot of these housing districts, again, this is kind of an emblematic of where that might go. This is where we're trying to bridge that gap, trying to provide different alternatives for housing, for residential future uses, future residential zonings, to make sure that we have a smooth transition, to make sure that those development pressures, you know, if they're in the wrong place, that the trade-off is established to where, you know, whether it's Smelter Town, whether it's wherever else, wherever it's geographically, wherever it is in the map, that it's accommodated for, and that we have smart growth and smart logical ideas of why growth should happen. It's probably the most important piece to get the where are these districts, right? Especially as you go into the land use code update. Of all the places around the county, this is kind of the one. There's a lot of moving parts because of infrastructure, the availability of infrastructure, the Salida, you know, the build out plans for their sanitation system, the availability of water. There's so many moving parts here, so it's important really to get that right and to understand the trade-offs. If we take one piece away, if you know we have a you know poker hand here, if we shuffle that hand or if that hand moves around, we have to know that there's a trade-off to doing so. Ultimately, coming back to that idea is if we allow it to happen in places other than where it makes sense, it might be fiscally challenging for the county to provide services to those places in the future. One of the pieces that was a focus area is here, whenever you have a county enclave, as we call it, a piece of the county that's wholly surrounded by the city, that's always a place of focus. There's obviously a historical reason for that. There's also the Van Devere Ranch, which I know has had a lot of planning thought. You could see how there's some ideas of transportation connectivity here. This is one that we pointed out as a focus area. So that's as annexation occurs, that's one place we want to make sure that you know, care is taken or understanding is established about what happens there. Lots of issues to look at, so it's important to take a look at those. And really kind of finally, Poncha Springs and Maysville. The take home here is unique. Poncha Springs is unique of the municipalities in that they've accommodated much of the growth, and we know that Poncha's grown per capita, you know, a lot, and they've accommodated much of that growth through annexation, which from the public process, that's kind of what we heard we're supposed to kind of be doing here. So it's an interesting case. With meetings with the town, the vision is to continue with their land use philosophy, which is most of the density should be in the center of town and less dense as you go out, a kind of concentric circle idea again. There's some natural boundaries. There's some interesting, you know, the town's essentially split into 4 by the transportation network. So there's some things that we can keep an eye on and try to, as a county, from the county standpoint, try to support. But that's why you'll see, you know, as far as a future land use vision, a lot of it in Poncha Springs is sort of dialed back. And that's because there's a lot of growth to occur at this point from a 5 or 10 year plan within the municipality. The county vision is essentially to bring those ideas in. And, you know, there may be a little bit more thinking in 2 areas, one of which is the county fairgrounds, which to a lot of folks seems maybe like an opportunity. There's some county-owned, publicly owned land out there, so maybe we should be opportunistic when the time comes to try to establish some of the growth, some of the types of growth that we want to see there. That's the focus area. The other one is the Highway 50 between Salida and Poncha Springs, which is, you know, it's going to come up a lot probably. We want to build upon the Future 50 plan, which is a great plan, but really from the Poncha side, we all know, besides some conservation easements that we'll push it in some other ways, this is an area of focus. And we want to make sure it doesn't happen haphazardly, and the town has told us so, and we all kind of know this. So that's another area of focus. Let's make sure that growth pattern is thoughtful and follows the philosophies of both Poncha and Salida. That's the idea. And as far as Maysville, the focus here is for infrastructure solutions in the long term. Anecdotally, we heard that there might be some issues. There's maybe not a whole lot of hard evidence about this, but that's why we need to study it a little closer and really kind of think about what are these problems? What are some things we can put into place step by step to help Maysville in 1 year, in 5 years, and in 10 years? You know, there's a lot of non-conforming parcels in Maysville because it was a big town. I think heard sometime at some point there was 3,000 folks there back in the mining era. So that means there's a lot of non-conforming parcels, which means to build a house out there, to build a house, you have to build enough lots to get 100-foot separation from the next septic. I think that's what it is, something like that, which obviously is kind of a burden on some of the existing folks and people who want to have a house out there. So that's limiting growth. And you know, folks were mostly okay with that limiting factor, but I think when we were at the fire camp, you know, let's fix the things we can, and let's have a county plan that helps us get one step to another 10 years down the road, get ahead of those conflicts essentially. Wow, okay, so that's a lot. That's the sub areas. A couple quick points here before we go into Q&A though. We have recognized through comments that there are revisions required in the plan. As far as the plan itself, the format, the table of contents. From a public review standpoint, there's a lot in there. There's a lot of content. There's a lot of words. We want to consolidate this thing to get to the key points, really. So the key discussion points, what are our motivations for doing this plan? Why are those our motivations? What are the population growth numbers? You know, what are the financial burdens that we may have problems with in servicing and capacity? So we're going to edit this down to some essential pieces and have almost a separate appendix to where if you would like to see the actual harder data and some of the input, we're going to have that available. So we're forming a committee to do so, and that's one of the big changes that we'll do in the future. And finally, before Q&A, this is, as Nora mentioned, this is not the end of the input process. There's a bunch of ways to submit feedback if we don't get to your questions tonight. We have a Facebook page. It's a really great place to get news, to submit comments, to understand what's happening, what's coming up. Brand new project website, and this one is www.togetherchaffeecounty.org, and it's got much the same content as the previous website, but this is where we shall now go to get and receive information. Marjo, any other comments on the website?
For everyone who wants to stay informed via email and actually receive project updates, if you could please go to the new project website and sign up for email notification at the bottom of the web page. That'll give us a way to get information out to you if you're not following the papers or following Facebook. That's a new thing. And then we also created some community discussion forum boards if you want to share ideas that you want others to be able to read. Right now, a lot of the comments are going directly to county staff and then to Planning Commission and the consultants. But if you're wanting to kind of share your ideas so that others in the community are aware of your input, you can share it within those forums or post questions and we can answer them so that other people can learn from each other. And it has events and we'll keep adding things to it. So hopefully that will help everyone stay informed of what's happening.
Excellent. Thank you. And of course, written feedback, please send via email to planning staff. John Ward, the planning manager, email right there. We also will have a couple other events, a couple pop-up events. The one we have confirmed, at least at the moment, is the Farmers Market in Salida on Saturday the 26th coming up. From 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. there'll be representatives from the panel here there to answer any questions or talk to you about that. There also is one coming up in Buena Vista. I think we're still maybe working out some of the scheduling, but it should be around the same time. If anybody on the panel has any additional information on that, please share it.
Dave, this is John Rorda. We're hoping to hold that the Sunday following. I believe that's the 27th of October. And we're hoping to have a booth at the Farmers Market in Buena Vista as well.
Just to clarify, that's September, not October?
Thanks, Marjo.
Yes. Good, so those are coming in. Those are coming up quick, so plenty of opportunities. There may be additional, so please keep an eye on the Facebook page and other outlets and sign up for the email as Marjo mentioned. All right, well, that was a lot of information. Hopefully we answered every single one of your questions, but of course there's probably more. There's probably some you have to sit and think about after hearing all this, but wanted to have an opportunity at the end here to address any questions. I think we'll start at least with Nora, if you could maybe bring up some of those, and we'll try to field the questions to the right folks. Or what do you got?
Yeah, definitely. Dave, would you mind going back to the last slide and just maybe we'll stick on that one, just so people have what they need. I just got one comment that said, please repeat the new website. That's togetherchaffeecounty.org is the new website. So the first question that came in was, how do we ensure that the tax revenues from transitional zones provide enough of a tax base / service base to pay for further infrastructure maintenance to make this worth it for the municipalities? In other words, if maintaining additional infrastructure is to fall to the towns with more pipe and street, how is a transitional zone where density is less than, or is presumably less than in town, going to pay for equivalent services?
Well, I can start at least with almost a theoretical answer, and we do have in our strategies and actions, there are certain analyses that a municipality or a county can do to basically understand cost benefit of a project, and ultimately that's one thing that we want to have provided for you as a government entity or jurisdiction, right? So we know though that more efficient land use and having that smoother transition is more cost effective. But in order to fully understand, there's definitely a certain amount of analysis and study that should be provided. Becky, anybody else have any other additional? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in here. Thanks for catching that, Nora. I got all excited when I saw the question and I moved it to a different location. So I'm glad you saw that. This is something that I'm ridiculously interested in. And I will encourage anyone listening tonight to go to a website, housinghealthchaffee.org. Over the past year, I have worked collaboratively with our public health department to bring different speakers to our community to address land use issues and growth management strategies. On that website, again, it's housinghealthchaffee.org, there is a recording listed under the speaker series as incremental development. And a good portion of that presentation that you can find there is about the fiscal implications of different development patterns. In addition, we are bringing back Kevin Shepard from a company called Verdunity, who does these kind of fiscal analysis, to have another conversation with our community in early November. So please pay attention to the Facebook and the local news outlets, as well as housinghealthchaffee.org, and join us in that presentation. And I think it'll take a much deeper dive into that discussion about how do we maintain our infrastructure long term. It's a great question.
I actually just want someone from the county to answer this, but from the planning perspective, within the comp plan, within the goals and strategies, we actually talk about this because we've had developments come in, for example, that have triggered the threshold for increasing the capacity of a turn lane onto Highway 285 or Highway 50. And you might have, the way it works now, it's the last development that comes in that goes over the threshold that's supposed to pay for that. And so we're not distributing the cost of development adequately, or even understanding the cost of development adequately. And so doing some assessments of what is the cost of development and how do we make it fair to the homeowners and the property owners and the developers, and sort of like how we go about that, because we don't have a good system for roads, for example. The cities, I know, are doing some of their own studies right now, trying to figure some of these things out. They're trying to figure out their raw water supplies. They're trying to figure out, their capacity and what they need to invest in. So I think the entire county right now is in a really interesting place because of growth pressures of trying to figure out the transition into the cost of infrastructure and to sustain it. We hear, the fire departments are up against the edge. We know the roads department is up against the edge. So I I think we're all in a place of having to learn. At least that's my understanding. And I'd love to hear from someone in the county, just what's happening with the budget on that.
Marjo, this is John Rorta. You point out a very significant element that we need to deal with. The entire north end of Buena Vista is encompassed by 1 and 2 acre parcels that ultimately need to access the highway. Game Trail, Ora Vista, they all came right to the edge of needing that highway access permit, but did not warrant it. And so, yes, you are very correct that the next person that comes in and takes a parcel of land and divides it into 3 or 4 may very well trigger the need for the access permit. And so we have a tremendous level of inequity that exists on the north end of Buena Vista concerning access permits. This same condition exists through numerous large parcels that are between Buena Vista and Salida. And so the need for improvement to our highway system, the Planning Commission or the Planning Department continues to work with CDOT regarding the need for these permits, and the need for those permits continues to be individually evaluated, but not evaluated as a whole. Thanks.
Looks like Keith wants to say something too.
My name just popped up. Okay.
Keith, did you want to say something, or should I move on to the next question?
My error. I'm wrong.
Oh, move on.
Okay.
Somehow
No
I got called on, but I didn't have my hand raised.
The next question is for Buena Vista. Are there plans regarding creating / coordinating trails to the west of town with those that are in town for pedestrians and bikers?
Okay, well, I will answer that then. I did answer that through the chat, but the larger group needs to be aware of this. There's a group up here. It's a very small group, but a very engaged group called NC3. That's for Northern Chaffee County Connections. And their whole mandate is to make sure that trails in the county align with trails in town so that they will ultimately become part of a multimodal transportation network. And they've established some priorities on those. And Kate Garwood is also the chair of our County Transportation Advisory Board. So there's some great synergy there. And just for an example, the wider margin on County Road 317, it goes out around Antero Circle and ties into 313, which goes down to Johnson Village from the town. And then that wider margin on 313 out to Johnson Village. And then the 2 wider margins on 306, West Main / Cottonwood Pass Road, are all a result of work that they've done and coordination and collaboration with the town. Now, I know people are somewhat disappointed in the fact that that's the way we've done these multi-use trails or paths, is that they are connected to the roadway. In a perfect world, they'd be detached, they'd have some lateral separation, but this isn't a perfect world and our resources are quite limited. So when it comes to things like right-of-way acquisition and mobilization and cost of construction, and perhaps even more importantly, snow removal and all those other sorts of things, this is the best way for us to do it in this environment. And I think once most people understand that, they're very accepting, and it's certainly safer than it was in the beginning. So we use those programs, and we get GOCO grant money whenever we can to help with those programs. And it helps us have nicer roads, more safe roads for pedestrians, power chair users, cyclists, and everybody concerned.
I just add one thing to that. I think within the goals and strategies of the plan are recommendations to kind of create a county-wide, you know, we tend to look at it around each of the municipalities, but starting to look at it county-wide at recreation access, commuter type paths, bike paths, routes to schools, all of those things in one community plan that everyone can look at versus the little individual ones we have. So that is a goal, I think, in the transportation part of the plan.
Yeah, all that'll be part of a multimodal transportation plan, which will be done, you know, after this is completed. It'll be one of those, what I've referred to several times as component plans or subordinate plans that are done mindful of what our comprehensive plan is and some of our other cooperative and collaborative plans.
Right. The next one I think is pretty simple for you, Dave. Why isn't the Centerville development showing the conservation easement in dark green? So I believe this was the Mid-Valley map.
Yeah, that might be a good catch. It also might just be because it was maybe not finally approved when we started this. This is, you know, we're 18 plus months into this, I think, and if it's as simple as once that's, you know, finally approved, finally adopted, we can make sure it's evident on the future land use maps as well.
Yep,
that's correct, Dave. It hasn't been finalized yet.
Okay. The next one is focus on Nathrop. Oh, I guess this is less of a question than a comment, but focus on Nathrop for low-income housing does not seem to make sense because it's very far from jobs, groceries, medical services, etc. People with low income will benefit most from close proximity to urban services.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I would be happy to address that. I think that's an accurate statement, and really, you know, it depends on how low our incomes go. The lower the income, the closer we need to be to all those goods and services. But back to kind of what Marjo queued me up for earlier in this conversation, there is still a missing middle, and there are still some folks that are earning enough wages to afford that transport. And there are still employees at the nearby ski resort that could afford to live in that kind of community. So it's just another option. And I really think when Dave was kind of demonstrating that plan, the conversation's more just about not necessarily encouraging growth there, but managing the growth that's going to happen regardless, a little bit more intentionally. But yet I agree, for big capital A housing, capital A affordable, it's probably not the best location.
Great. There's another one that's a little bit complex, so we may not really have time to address right now, but I think what they're asking is regarding the rural agricultural future land use, and I think the sentence about allowing limited manufacturing of agricultural products that do not create visual or other impacts to the surrounding rural environment. They reference the right to ranch legislation and an article on CPR about how sometimes ranching can be less desirable in terms of neighbors for those who are newer to rural communities. I think that might just be a misunderstanding of the language. I think that the rural agricultural future land use is really intended to promote agricultural uses and activities. If you want to.
Yeah, that could be a misunderstanding. This is Keith. I copied that, and our attorney who's with us tonight isn't a panelist. And
I can make him one if you want to.
Well, I was trying to get him in there, but he's going to contact that person directly.
Okay,
and
great.
He thinks it can probably be stated better or perhaps more clearly, and that there are some things to be worked out there, but the draft hasn't been thoroughly reviewed by legal yet. So, you know, we obviously want to be compliant with everything and statutorily especially. So he'll be looking at that and contacting that citizen.
And then the last one I have, I think maybe there's two more. Why would we want to focus on growth and infrastructure in Maysville?
I could kind of start that one off, and if anybody else has any additional comments, please give them. But when we were up in Maysville doing our neighborhood meeting, we heard some anecdotal evidence based on what's kind of happening out there, which has to do with short-term rentals. A lot of the residences up there being used for that, which, you know, is something that's important to folks. That type of use may be causing some issues for, you know, effectively groundwater, or having enough of some kind of resources to, you know, as these uses continue to evolve and as we start to, you know, use our houses for different things, there might be some infrastructure issues. Now, again, we're kind of going with it and understanding what things are, and that's anecdotal. So that's part of the reason why we just want to study it a little bit more. But I think that's the thing is if there's some issues now, let's take a look at what they are before we make any big assumptions. That's kind of the nature of it. The people of Maysville didn't say they wanted to be another city or another big thing or anything. So the way that the lots are set up to where it's higher density without having the services and you know, incorporating tax base as a town, that's kind of where it's coming from.
Maybe just a point of clarification as we like work on the plan. Like when we say focus areas, it doesn't always mean designated growth area.
That's right.
It means that there are issues around managing the character of that community area, like whether it be Maysville or Maysville. So maybe that's just something for us to make sure we clarify in the next plan.
Very good point. Yeah. I know sorry, Nora, is there another?
There's just one more, and this might work out ridiculously perfectly with timing. What about more regular public transportation between municipalities that would help congestion, those who are low income get to their jobs, and those who do not drive?
Anyone from TAB on the call? There's a very large theme for transportation mobility and connectivity in the comprehensive draft plan part 1 that the Transportation Area Board spent a lot of time creating, and speaks specifically to the work of coordinating all of the very different organizations that actually exist in our community that are providing transportation. And so I think the goal is not the goal, but the intent is to move towards a multimodal transportation plan that will create that better access between communities. We're not at the place where there's like, you know, we're not a resort community with a rural transportation authority. But they are trying to improve coordination. I think they're actually working on a shuttle. You guys would know more than me. Working on a shuttle between the municipalities now for local commuters.
Well, there is a limited schedule. There is a limited schedule of service between Salida and BV. And then there's also on-call, non-emergency medical transport. There's some services available between Leadville and Salida on certain days and everything. The Chaffee Shuttle operates this stuff. The problem with fixed route service, especially in a rural setting like ours, is it's very expensive. So the service is either quite limited or it's not fixed route service, fixed timetable service, it's on call. But it's something that the TAB, and once again, fortunately, Kate Garwood has a lot of experience in this, and Hank Martin, who is with the Chaffee Shuttle now, is really taken the bit in his teeth and gotten smarter and smarter about rural transit. They're making some tremendous strides on that, and we're trying to find every opportunity we can to get grant money to continue to expand our service and to help underwrite local service with contract work for CDOT and some of the other regional providers.
Well, I know we wanted to leave a minute for some closing statements.
Can I just say one thing on questions, because I'm sure people need to absorb a lot of this, is that the Planning Commission, the staff, we're all available to answer questions, so please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We've been fielding questions the last 2 weeks and are setting up some smaller individual meetings with neighborhoods, and we just want to make sure that everyone knows that, you know, we're open to listening and looking forward to continuing to work with the community.
This is Keith. A few closing comments. One, I want to assure everyone who's on the call that, and you can certainly share this with all your fellow residents and citizens, this really isn't our plan, it's the residents' plan. And they've consistently said over years and years that the thing that continues to be condensed in keep the towns town and the country country. That's been said for over 40 years, and the bumper sticker's been around for almost as long, the bumper sticker statement. But it's our duty as members of the Planning Commission and as county commissioners to tell the residents what you need to do to achieve that vision, what you need to do to accomplish that vision. It's a similar relationship as your physician or your attorney would have with you. If this is what you want to do, if this is what you want to accomplish, if this is your goal in life, then this is what you need to do. You can't get there, you can't accomplish that vision absent doing some of these things. If you don't really want that vision, then whatever you do, I guess, is fine. But we are really wanting this to be a grassroots, grass tops up plan. And there have been several times we've had meetings, we've had open houses when actually the attendance has been quite disappointing. For those of us in this business, it almost breaks your heart. We really want lots of public engagement, and we really want public comment on this, because if the public doesn't buy into it, if the public doesn't feel and take ownership in it, then it will be like a lot of these comprehensive plans and other plans that you hear about. It's sitting on a shelf somewhere and nobody's paying any attention to it. Nobody's ever referencing it, or it just sits in a file drawer. And then years and years go by and you go through another one of these drills to update it and try to bring it more in alignment with what the community's vision of itself is. So please stay engaged, go to the website, follow the Facebook page if you're on social media, do all these things and make your visions and goals and desires for this comprehensive plan known to us. We can't do anything with them if you don't share them with us. So thank you for being here tonight, and I'm finished. So thanks all.
I might add a couple comments there. This is Greg Felt, if you're on the phone. You know, this has been a really tough, just about a year now, between the Decker fire and fire recovery and then going into the whole COVID situation. And it has, it's been a distraction for those of us in county government, as well as a lot of our population. And it's presented a lot of challenges, particularly the COVID situation in terms of communication and people's ability to participate. I really do want to deeply thank our planning commission, our planning staff, CT, the consultants, you know, Dave and Nora and Wayne, and our associate staff for the amount of work they've already put into this to get us to where we are now. We're not at the finish line yet. This has been, as they say, an iterative process. That word drives me crazy because it always means like things go on forever, but that's the nature of planning. I think, as Keith has mentioned before, it's a continual process. We recognize the challenges that the inability to meet in person has presented. partly in terms of just what people are used to, and also some people's flat out capabilities or bandwidth for broadband and that sort of thing. And so I know they're on the screen right now. There's some, I think, additional events that are in person. Marjo mentioned the willingness to have some smaller group meetings. Also talked with legal a little bit about the possibility of having a larger scale public meeting where those who are on the Planning Commission who have COVID vulnerabilities or people in their circle that they're taking care of or that kind of thing and don't feel comfortable in that setting could participate by Zoom, and we could allow people who do want to come to, you know, more of a fairgrounds style meeting. It would be limited by the public health orders, but still maybe a little more of a large scale meeting. That is a possibility. It's something that could be brought together. And in that regard, I guess as acknowledging that we've spent probably over 15 months now, maybe 16, really actively working on this. I do want to acknowledge that really not in a rush to finish it. I'd like to get it done, but I don't want to leave any stones unturned. So if that's something that's important to you to attend more of a in-person situation where you can speak your mind rather than typing it, that sort of thing, certainly understand, and we're definitely open to working on that. And you can reach out to Keith or me. We're certainly easy to find, or to our planning department. Give us your thoughts, and we're open to trying to accommodate that. Really appreciate everyone being here tonight, taking the time to listen. I know there's been a lot of concerns. I hope this answered some of the questions that people had. And again, we will just continue to work on that and move towards completion. So thank you for your time tonight.
Okay, well, if anybody else has any other closing comments, I want to be respectful of people's time. We amazingly got through all that, tons of information. Just as a reminder, visit the new website. Please continue to engage. But again, yes, thank you all for being here. Hopefully you learned something, and continue to let us know any of your thoughts, and we will definitely answer any questions that are submitted in any way directly if we can. Okay, thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening, and look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you.
Thanks.